Who doesn't get excited about planning a vacation? You want to find the best accommodation, snag reservations at the most talked about restaurants, and hit up all the must-sees, right? Well, there is a downside to ticking all of those travel boxes. You miss out on the possibilities. What if you just don't feel like waiting in yet another line today, and instead, you just go wandering? And what if that wandering leads you to an old woman hand-rolling pasta in a little alleyway in Puglia? She invites you in for coffee, shows you pictures of her family, and sends you off with the tightest hug you've ever been given. What if you accidentally sleep in and miss your organized tour of San Jose? The guy at the front desk sees your disappointment and calls his cousin who runs a stable. Next thing you know, you're horseback riding on a family farm, eating a home-cooked dinner among your new friends in Costa Rica. Sounds pretty great, huh? My guest today is Brittany Annis, and she's become an expert at setting ripe conditions for more meaningful travel experiences. Her travel writing focuses on finding the balance between planning and going with the flow, a trend referred to as slow travel. So put down that itinerary just for a day and let yourself drift into the unknown as you discover the unpredictable magic of slow travel. I'm super excited to introduce everybody to my guest today, Brittany Annis. And Brittany is a travel writer. She travels all over the place. She covers all sorts of topics. But today we're talking about slow travel. Hi, Brittany. Welcome.
Hi, Angie. Thanks for having me.
I loved your article in Men's Journal on slow travel. So wanted to talk to you today about what is that? What does it mean to travel slowly?
I think one thing as travelers that we all have in common are these magical moments that just unfold on the trip that you never saw coming. Maybe you followed a recommendation of your Uber driver or somebody that you met in the bar and it just happened. And the only way that that can happen is if our trips aren't so scheduled that they don't allow for those kind of ways to go off script or off itinerary. So I think it's really slowing down and letting the destination unfold in front of you as well.
So would you say it's like the opposite of FOMO?
Absolutely. I think of it this way. When I first started traveling, and I'm going to date myself here, you couldn't go on your apps and make reservations or whatnot. I was printing out MapQuest directions and driving to places and whatnot. So then I felt like we started to get to this point where, especially during the pandemic, we really needed reservations. We really needed everything to be timed. Even our entry into museums were timed. Some of our dinner reservations were more timed. Hikes required more permits and reservations. And so I think that once we came out of that, there was maybe a craving to slow down and not have everything so scheduled because you miss maybe a train in a new city and then, oh my gosh, how that could make an entire itinerary unravel is really stressful.
When do you think it started? Because it wasn't just with the pandemic, right? It wasn't just a response to the pandemic. It feels like maybe we kind of bounce back and forth between the FOMO kind of travel and the slow kind of travel.
I do think social media has put pressure on us to maybe capture all the sites or all the must-sees when we're traveling. So I think we probably traveled a little bit slower before there was the Instagram reel or carousel to put our 9 best highlights up of our trip. In my life, I travel very slow when I'm on vacation because it's when I'm traveling for work. I have to be in a destination and kind of get as much done in a day as I can just because I'm looking for story ideas and restaurant recommendations and whatnot. So it's always something for me. I've never liked to be too scheduled. I always wanted just some downtime. And I think downtime really helps us relax.
Yes, because we are supposed to get these like psychological and health benefits out of travel, right? Our vacations are meant to be restorative. Was there one trip that left you feeling like we can do this better? There has to be a better way to travel.
Absolutely. There was a trip that I took for work when I first started as a travel writer. This was almost a decade ago. I was in Nashville and it was my first time. And I was at this minor league baseball stadium. to see a baseball game, and it was the coolest stadium I had ever been in. And I think seeing arenas and stadiums are a really fun way to travel because every city has kind of its own unique sports culture. And so I was in Nashville. They had a mini golf set up within the stadium. It felt like you were at somebody's backyard barbecue. They had like lawn chairs set out. There was frozen Jack Daniels and Coke slushies. There was a hot dog that I had with peach salsa on it. And I was getting into it. And then we had to leave at the third inning because I had to get to the next thing. That was actually another thing that would be like a headline for any itinerary, which was watching music, live music at the Bluebird Cafe, which is a famous cafe. And that night, again, this was years ago, but Maren Morris's songwriter was performing, and it's kind of this songwriter circle. It was just this beautiful moment in the songwriter circle. My dad had recently passed away, and they performed a song that reminded me of my dad. And I had all these emotions, but I felt like I didn't have any time to process them because I was moving from one itinerary item to the next within every couple hour or two. And of course, that's work and that's what it had to be. But it made me realize like, wow, I would have loved to do one of those things and really taken it in, especially the songwriters thing, maybe go back to my hotel and journal about it or like process the emotions of making it feel like I was really there and close with my dad in that moment. And those are, again, some of the things that you never expect to come up in travel. I never expected that my favorite baseball game I've ever been to was in a minor league stadium in Nashville, or that I'd go to this cafe and feel this connection I hadn't felt with my dad since he had passed. And so I think being able to process all of those moments when we're traveling is so important.
I think what everyone can probably agree on is that it is a better, more restorative, relaxing trip if you do it slower and have fewer things on your itinerary. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think we've heard for a long time. I don't know if you've ever felt this way or heard somebody say it, but they say, I need a vacation from my vacation.
I say that all the time. I'm the guiltiest party here.
I was in a hotel in the Riviera Maya, and the ruins of Tulum were by. There were all these things that you could go see and do. And the hotel had the most comfortable bed I had ever been in. And they had this beautiful like stone bathtub. And I really wanted to just spend time in my room. I wanted to sleep in and take this bath. And I felt guilt at first, but they had these little cruiser bikes and you could just ride around the resort. And I took probably a couple days to just relax and enjoy the resort. I signed up for like a cooking class with their chef and got really great tips on how to make tacos in a more local way. And it was, like I said, I felt guilt at first. And then I ended up learning a lot from that and really leaning into it.
It really boils down to pressure, like pressure we put on ourselves, and then the pressure to produce content, whether it's for our job or just so people back home are a little bit jealous that we had an amazing trip. And now the AAA Travel Minute. Nobody can predict flight delays, but with a little planning, you can prevent them from derailing your vacation. For instance, if you book a direct flight, there's no connection to miss. Many travelers find that having peace of mind is worth spending a little extra money. Some travelers will even leave from their second closest airport, if it means getting a direct flight. When that's not possible and you must connect, be sure to leave plenty of time between legs. And remember, airline search engines can return options with layovers as short as 45 minutes. Yikes! Being savvy about when you fly helps too. According to tracking site FlightAware, the first flight of the day is less likely to be canceled or delayed, and weekdays typically have more alternative flights available, should the worst occur. Of course, cancellations and delays are a fact of life, so always be prepared. A AAA travel advisor can help you plan and book your trip, and can help make changes if anything goes awry. So we talked about the benefits to the person who's doing the slow travel, but do you think there are any benefits for the destination when travelers are experiencing things slower?
Absolutely. I think that we are kind of at a boiling point right now with some of the headlines of some European countries and residents there being overwhelmed by the tourist traffic that's coming in. And so I think we can also step back and think about our own homes. We all have the resources that we love and that we want to share with other people, but in a responsible way. So One example, I think in Colorado, where I'm from, we have Estes Park. It's at the front porch of Rocky Mountain National Park, and there's so much to do there. One thing that's just this beautiful thing is elk come out and bugle during their mating season in October, and we call it Elktober. And they're hulking and they just are like walking around town and on the golf courses and in the parks. And people from around the world come to see this. That's where we see people get in trouble. They're getting too close to the elk, they're kind of stalking them. Locals, we start to feel a little bit nervous when travelers get too close because that can endanger them, but also put the elk at risk. You can watch them from binoculars and maybe not get a photo that you can post because you don't want to be that close to them. Just have this like moment and kind of an only in Colorado experience.
In this article that you wrote for Men's Journal, slow travel is described as getting away from tick box tourism and the must-do lists and connecting with the destination in a way that's tailored to your own interests. So, for somebody who's listening, who's maybe approaching slow travel for the first time, how do they start planning a trip? And how do they research the right destinations and avoid the must-do lists, but still actually get in the things that they want to do? And how do they know what's slow and what's too much? How do you know?
I think it's going to depend for each individual. I had this lovely trip to Santa Barbara. My fiance and I had just got engaged, and we looked at one of those 36-hour lists of Santa Barbara. And I think if we would have done even half of the things on that list, it would have felt like we were on an Amazing Race type of show because you'd really be packing it in to get everything done. But we went through that list and we found a couple things that were interesting to us. And I made a reservation at one of the restaurants. We kind of celebrated our engagement there. It was a fantastic recommendation. It was this taqueria and it was filled with locals. But then the next day, we found some things that weren't on the list. So we both kind of are into spas and wellness. And we found this it was a Himalayan salt cave, and we just ducked into it. Our hotel had these really fun yard games, like a giant Jenga. And so we ended up just really enjoying the hotel too. There were some makers and farmers markets, and we were able to shop around and meet some local artists. And again, that wasn't probably anything on a list that we had read, but we just kind of followed our curiosity. And I'd say maybe 25% of our trip was planned and 75% just happened and aligned with things that we were interested in.
Do you feel like that's a pretty good ratio, 25-75?
For me, it is. I love that. I have a good group of girlfriends, and there's 4 of us, and we're probably all on a little bit of a different spectrum of how much activity we like on a vacation. So one of my girlfriends has a business that she's so busy, and so wherever we go on vacation, she wants to find the nearest body of water and be there for the entire week, while another one, she likes to be on the go all the time. So there's a couple of us that are in the middle, and it's really fun to try to negotiate how much we'll do on one of our trips.
How do you balance that?
It's kind of funny. We'll make presentations about where we want to go on our next group trip. And then we'll each kind of talk about what our priority is for that vacation. I have a friend that's just a foodie. She's a former restaurant writer. We call her the cruise director of our trips because she's always got some really great restaurant recommendations she's sussed out. My thing is, I always just want my friends to join me in a game of volleyball in the pool if there's something going on. So we all get to kind of say what our wish would be for the trip, and it kind of balances out.
That's it right there. It's communication with the people you're traveling with up front about what your priorities are, what you can handle, what your energy level is, what you're trying to get out of the trip. That's huge. How many times have I gone on a trip with a group? Nobody's on the same page. Everybody has wildly different expectations. And you can't really go on one of those 4 activity a day trips with somebody who just wants to walk on the beach. What are some of the most impactful elements of a slow travel experience?
I think connecting with locals in some way, getting some of their recommendations. You could also do something like Hawaii tourism is doing this a lot now, where you can volunteer. And that's a wonderful way to connect with a destination. And so they have all kinds of volunteering options. So you could do a beach cleanup, or I think they even have some Pearl Harbor restoration for people who might be more engineering inclined or interested in history or whatnot. I think that's a beautiful way to connect with a new place. I think it's kind of leaving that itinerary open for those magical moments to come about. But I do think the reality is you have to plan some things if you want to get into a restaurant or an attraction that requires advanced planning. And then I think also journaling or taking some notes. What did you see? What did you learn? How did it make you feel? When I was a kid, my grandma would take me on a trip to visit my great grandparents, and she would have me keep a travel journal each day. And she said, make sure you do it each day, even if it's just one sentence, because you're not going to remember it in these like vivid details when you get back. And, I was packing up to move recently. I was just selling my house, and I found those travel journals from when I was 9. And it was so sweet to be able to kind of read what I was thinking and feeling back then. And so I think just being able to like take the time to digest the destination and learn from it and reflect on how you feel and whatever your interest is, whether it's culinary or art or sports tourism, just to take away the lesson that you learned from your trip and take some time to write it down.
And we don't always leave space to do that when we have 3 tours planned in a day, because it's go, go, go. And I have to be there at a certain time. And do I have the right camera batteries? And you're thinking about so many other elements to make it all so perfect. But then you get to the end of the day and you're super tired and you just go to sleep and you don't process. Then you have to get up at 4 a.m. for the hot air balloon ride the next day, which all those things are so valuable, right? Slow travel it's not anti-experience. It's not anti-reservations. It's just pro space and pro time for other things to happen. So I guess it's on the individual to figure out what works for them as far as what needs to be booked and what can just happen organically.
Yeah, that's the essence of it.
So you mentioned in Hawaii how you can volunteer, and that's one good way to get to know some local folks and the local culture. Do you have any other tips for people to connect with locals?
I've heard and kind of experienced myself that some of these like mid-sized cities with good transit systems are great places to do a slow travel trip. Finding some of those lesser known destinations. We did Menorca, which is one of the Spanish islands that's close to Ibiza and Mallorca last summer. We found a farmhouse through a local that did these nightly dinners, and it was no problem to get a reservation the day of. And we also really connected with one of the bartenders at our hotel and really enjoyed our conversations with him. The whole point of that is that that country just isn't as busy as some of the other European destinations right now. Finding that lesser known destination that isn't filling up your TikTok feed right now might have some rewards when it comes to slow travel, just because you're not competing with so many tourists on the trails or in the restaurants or at the beaches.
If you're kind of off the tourist trail, that's a different interaction that you're going to have with the local folks than perhaps if you're on it and it's much more of an experience designed for tourists.
I think shoulder seasons also make slow travel a little bit easier. I did go to Santorini in May before it really picked up with their very busy travel season. And again, just kind of gave me a little bit more opportunity to talk to the artists and the shopkeepers and whatnot, because there wasn't so much hustle and bustle at that time.
Do you feel like tour companies are embracing slow travel?
Yeah. When I did that story for Men's Journal, I talked to a few, and they were finding that people wanted to do less in a day, but still do everything that was on the itinerary. So they've started extending their trips. I think one of them was Black Tomato, one of the tour groups. And then I talked to a Mount Kilimanjaro guide who was also kind of offering some longer trips to do that trek.
7 days is pretty short for a trip. If you're taking a trip abroad, that's actually really short. And you do have to cram a lot of things in because you've got 2 travel days. You're thinking about jet lag, all these things. But anything longer than 7 days, and we have to work around those 3 dreaded letters, PTO. If you're an American, you just don't have a lot of paid time off usually. So how do we balance our time off allowance, but still get that slow travel experience?
Yeah, that is such the paradox. That's really hard, right? I did write a story last year for Forbes about how to negotiate more PTO. So the best time to do that is when you're up for review or when you're getting a new job. If you're able to say, I'm not going to negotiate a raise, but I'd like to negotiate a few more days, and that would be really important for me, that would be great. Because we Americans, I've read some studies that show we have not only the least amount of vacation time compared to other countries, but we're really bad at taking it all. So we leave a lot of PTO in the bank too. And that's just a broader cultural discussion about our work-life balance and whatnot. But there's some things that I've been seeing on TikTok that are really fun about how to maximize your PTO days. So when to request the days off to sync up with holidays. So definitely recommend doing that and kind of looking at your schedule and figuring out how you can kind of build your PTO maybe on top of some of our holidays. So even things with like Thanksgiving, you could get over to Europe and they're not celebrating Thanksgiving. So a lot of times you can get some better like flight deals to London and Paris and whatnot. And you're a little bit ahead of the holiday season. But I think that's the challenge, right? Is if we only have 2 weeks of PTO, how do we see and do everything that we want to do? And maybe for some people, you might take little weekend trips here and there and have these 3-day trips that are close to home or even staycations. But then some people might want to just use all that PTO on one trip and really look forward to it and have a really restorative vacation. But don't we envy? I reach out to people in Europe sometimes this time of year and it says we'll be back in the end of August or something like that. And I wish we all had that much PTO.
There's that great meme that's someone from England and it's their summer out of office message. And it's just like, I'll be back. Email me in a month if you need me. And then it's the American version, which is like, I'm having a kidney removed this afternoon. I will be available at all times. Sorry for the delay. Like, so sorry for getting my kidney removed. So that's really, like you said, it's a cultural thing that Americans have, and we just don't have as much time off. So we have to be extra diligent and we have to try extra hard to do slow travel and really be deliberate about our schedules and our planning if we're going to do it right, and not let that FOMO, that need to do everything, not let it take over because we have such a limited time.
If you're in between careers, maybe take some time, a little bit of a sabbatical of sorts, even if it's just 2 weeks in between jobs or something like that, to get some travel in.
Absolutely. Take it where you can get it. Brittany Annis, thank you for joining us, and thank you, our listeners, for being with us. If you're planning a trip, be sure to connect with a AAA travel advisor. Check out AAA.com/travel or visit your local branch. This podcast is a production of Auto Club Enterprises. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave us a review. I'm Angie Orth. Thank you for traveling with AAA.